Welcome to this explainer. Look, today we're diving into some fascinating source material that completely shatters a myth we'd all been sold. You know the one, the idea that hard work alone fixes absolutely everything. I mean, we're totally surrounded by this hustle culture constantly screaming at us to just grind harder if we want to succeed, right? But here's the thing. If you truly want to become exceptional, you have to stop following that surface-level advice. Instead, we're going to pull back the curtain and look at how the top 1% actually operate. We're diving into a framework built on 4 totally counterintuitive principles that separate the absolute best from everyone else. And spoiler alert, it's not about just clocking more hours. It's about strategically leveraging your biology, your true nature, and the systems you build to basically engineer inevitable success. So, here's our roadmap for today. 1. The grinds myth and anti-talent. 2. Your biological balance sheet. 3. The simulation advantage. 4. Virtuoso silence. And finally, 5. The timing of success. Let's jump right in.
Section 1. The grind myth and your anti-talent.
Okay, this is a massive paradigm shift, so stick with me here. We all know what a weakness is, right? It's something you aren't exactly great at, but if you practice, maybe take a class, you'll eventually improve. Standard stuff. But an anti-talent? That is an entirely different beast. An anti-talent is something that simply does not respond to effort at all. It literally will never scale no matter how many thousands of hours you throw at it, because your brain just isn't wired for it. Trying to fix an anti-talent is, well, it's like trying to drive a car with square wheels. Pushing the gas pedal harder is absolutely not going to help. The highest performers out there, they don't try to fix their anti-talents. They recognize them, and then they engineer their entire lives to avoid them. To put that into perspective, take Keanu Reeves. Early on in his career, critics totally tore him apart for being kinda stiff in these heavy, emotional, dramatic roles. Dialogue-heavy drama was literally his anti-talent. But instead of grinding through acting classes to force himself to become the next Robert De Niro, he just leaned away from it. He completely pivoted to physicality, precision, and this amazing Zen-like calmness. I mean, get this, in John Wick 4, he speaks a grand total of 380 words across 3 hours, and the result, a massive $3 billion box office legacy. Or look at Satya Nadella. When he took over Microsoft, everyone totally expected him to be this table-pounding, highly competitive alpha male CEO, just like Steve Ballmer. But playing that role would have been Nadella's anti-talent. Instead, he was thoughtful. He quoted poetry. He shifted the entire company culture from cutthroat competition to empathy and innovation. And that perceived softness, it became Microsoft's ultimate competitive advantage, paving the way to an unbelievable $3 trillion market cap. So you're probably asking, how do I actually find my own anti-talent? Well, ask yourself these 3 simple questions. First, what completely drains you that actually seems to energize other people? Second, what have you worked at for years with almost zero improvement to show for it? If you answered those first 2, boom, you've just identified your anti-talents. Stop investing your energy there. And finally, ask yourself, what do people compliment you on that you've never even really worked on? That right there? That is your innate, natural talent, and that is exactly where your energy needs to go.
Moving on to Section 2, your biological balance sheet.
So there's this famous 2011 study of judges making serious parole decisions, and the data is genuinely terrifying. At 8:50 in the morning, a prisoner had a 65% chance of being granted parole. But by 12:50 p.m., right before lunch, that chance absolutely plummeted to near zero. No way, right? But wait, after the judges ate lunch, the approval rate instantly spiked right back up to 65%. Now, these judges weren't biased or corrupt, they were just chemically depleted. Their brains had literally run out of glucose from decision fatigue. And when the brain lacks fuel, it naturally defaults to the safest, easiest option, which, if you're a judge, is just saying no. It proves that your biology isn't somehow separate from your performance, it actually is your performance.
Because of this, you really have to start treating your biology like a financial balance sheet. You've got assets, and you've got liabilities. And high performers, they define these incredibly clearly. Sleep, for example, is your ultimate biological asset. It physically grows your cognitive capacity. Yet, crazy enough, hustle culture tells us to treat sleep like a liability, something we should cut back on so we can just work more. It makes no sense. On the flip side, every single tiny choice you make during the day, like what you're going to wear or what you want to eat for lunch, is a liability. It carries a hidden decision cost that is actively draining your mental fuel.
And just look at the penalty for ignoring this stuff. According to CDC data, there's a 20 to 30% drop in working memory after just one night of short sleep. A bankrupt body simply cannot support a wealthy mind. So, to protect your assets, you've got to reduce your liabilities. The source speaker for this explainer, who happens to be a former CEO, shared this brilliant little hack. He actually ate the exact same boring meal of protein and greens every single day for lunch. Why on earth would he do that? Simply to completely eliminate the cognitive clutter of deciding where to go, what to order, and when to eat. He was saving his brain's precious glucose for the million-dollar decisions rather than wasting it on the lunch menu.
All right, Section 3, the simulation advantage.
Think about the 20 Formula One drivers in the world. Their entire careers hinge on a tiny handful of split-second decisions, when to brake, when to overtake. But here's the secret. They don't practice these absolutely critical choices for the first time out on the actual track. No way! They use simulators year-round, and neuroscience backs this up perfectly, telling us that simulation activates nearly the exact same neural circuits as the real experience. Elite performers never practice high-stakes decisions while the actual event is happening. By the time they finally step into the room or onto the track, they've already lived it 100 times in their heads. And the best part, today you don't need a multi-million-dollar F1 rig to do this yourself. You have AI. Here is a super actionable playbook you can use for your next big interview or client pitch. Turn on the voice mode of your favorite AI app. And I mean actually speak to it out loud, because hearing a real voice triggers a genuine biological stress response. First, ask the AI to act as a friendly AI to help build up your confidence. Then reboot it as a skeptic AI to poke holes in your arguments and really force you to make a stronger case. Finally, program it to be a completely irrational boss who just refuses to listen. This is amazing for training your emotional composure under pressure. Afterward, just ask yourself, what surprised me? What threw me off? You basically get to fail privately, over and over again, before you ever have to perform publicly. Section 4. Virtuoso Silence. There was a genuinely fascinating 2024 study on decision-making that revealed something profound. It showed that if you have high internal neural noise under pressure, your performance just tanks, even if you have the exact same IQ and experience as the person sitting right next to you. In those moments, your brain is basically fighting a war between two competing things: the signal, which is the actual task-relevant information you need to focus on, and the noise, which is your anxiety, the 10 unread emails in your inbox, or maybe that argument you had this morning. Peak performers don't necessarily have better brains than us. They've just trained themselves to have less noise. They act a lot like virtuoso musicians, naturally gravitating toward the silence between the notes. So how do we actually do this? Well, you can use a micro-transition technique called the stop, drop, swap protocol. Whenever you're moving between demanding tasks, try this. First, stop. Finish the previous block completely. Close the browser tabs, shut the notebook, leave absolutely no cognitive residue behind. Second, drop. Physically release your tension. Drop your shoulders, take a deep breath, and just allow yourself to be completely empty for exactly 10 seconds. Finally, swap. This is the conscious trigger where you intentionally switch your brain over to the new task. Doing this clears out all the static and ensures you are fully present for whatever challenge is next. And finally, Section 5. The timing of success. Now, I want to just slow down the pacing a bit here. We've talked a lot about systems and biological hacks, but we really need to talk about the timeline of when all this hard work actually pays off. The creator of the source material we're covering today shared a deeply personal story about this. He actually arrived in the US as a runaway teenager, totally broke, barely speaking a word of English. Years later, after fighting his way into business school, he became rigidly obsessed with one single goal: becoming a top-tier management consultant. He practiced relentlessly, but he failed 10 separate interviews. 10! The harsh reality was his brain just didn't work the way those specific firms need it to. It was his anti-talent. But as a mentor wisely told him at the time, a river always finds a way around a mountain and gets to the ocean. Just because one specific door doesn't open doesn't mean you won't eventually reach your ocean. So, the absolutely crucial point we need to understand is this: peak performance alone does not lead to immediate success. Success operates entirely on its own unpredictable schedule. It arrives when it wants to, not necessarily when you demand it to. Therefore, you really cannot focus on being successful. You can only focus on being skillful. Just focus on the tiny patch of ground right in front of you. Do your work with honesty, master your biology, avoid those anti-talents, and build your skills. Because at the end of the day, that is the only part of the equation you actually have control over.
And you know, if you do that, life has a really funny way of putting you in incredible rooms you never even thought to ask for. But you have to leave room for serendipity. If you stay rigidly locked onto a path that just isn't meant for you, you're going to end up nowhere. So, I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to take away from today's explainer. Look at your current path. Look at your unique skills and the opportunities around you. What door will you leave open for the winds of chance to blow in? Thank you so much for joining me, and keep learning.